Why did you leave Sky News to go to GB News?
Become woke, it had become dogmatic. When the opportunity came, I jumped as high as I could.
I feel like Sky News today is less relevant than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Nobody seems to watch it anymore.
JJ, nobody did.
Nobody did?
Sort of clean skin that liked BLM. It wasn't news. It
Yeah.
was agitprop. It was propaganda.
What were the early days like of GB News?
It was a car crash. It was a total car crash.
One of the criticisms I hear about GB News the most is that it's reform TV. It's Nigel Farage's propaganda arm. And that's fair. When you were at Sky, were you ever told to not cover a story?
There was only one really glaring example I can think of.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Daily Expresso. I'm JJ Anisiobi, but more importantly, I'm joined by broadcasting legend Colin Brazier. Thanks for coming in, Colin.
Hi, JJ. It's nice to be here. Thanks for not calling me broadcasting veteran, which is what tends to happen these days. I appreciate that. We got off to a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. You are a legend. You really are a legend. It's like Trevor McDonald, a little bit further down this year.
Wow.
Hugh Edwards, just put that.
Yeah, well,
we won't go into that.
Yeah.
No, first question,
What a great
Colin.
start. Yeah.
Why did you leave Sky News to go to GB News?
Yeah, well, I left at my own hand, of my own volition, actually. I'd been there for more than 20 years. I'd gone to Sky because it wasn't the BBC. It was to the right of the BBC. It felt more representative of British public opinion. Over those 20 years, 20 plus years, I left in 2021, so 5 years now since I left Sky, and maybe it's changed. Maybe it's changed in those intervening 5 years. I doubt it. It had become, by the time I left, something which it wasn't when it began. It had become woke. It had become dogmatic, in my opinion. And there were punctuation marks along that narrative story, wokewards, which I remember, and I think some of the people who were loyal viewers of Sky News remember as well, whether that was the 2015 migrant crisis, whether it was the Brexit vote, which in a sense was sort of connected to the migrant crisis. And the way that channel, that news station covered those events, I think was pretty corrosive of public trust. And it was certainly corrosive of my trust in the institution. I'd spent 10 years hoping that some sort of more representative alternative would emerge, and that was GB News. And when the opportunity came, I jumped as high as I could, as quickly as I could.
Wow. I feel like Sky News today is less relevant than it's ever been.
I hope that's true.
I think it is true.
Yeah.
Nobody seems to watch it anymore. Certainly, I mean, there's a couple...
JJ, nobody did.
Nobody did?
I mean, this is
Really?
the great myth. This is the great myth about Sky News, that it punched so far above its weight because, in other newsrooms people watched it, in government offices people watched it, in PR offices, in the corridors of power it was on, but actually, and maybe in the odd hotel.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I'm not sure people really watched it like they watch, mainstream TV, Antiques Roadshow or whatever. They're not watching in numbers. But that was useful to Sky corporately because it meant that they had this sort of lobbying power. I think Sky News helped them open up the corridors of power for if they were looking for regulatory changes or something. It was a good way of it helped cleanse and rinse the image of Sky as well, which was tarnished, you could argue, by the association with Rupert Murdoch. And if you're coming from a certain part of the political spectrum, that was not an association you enjoyed. So I think there was an attempt over the years to repudiate that sort of Murdoch legacy and all that went with that, and emerge as this sort of clean skin that liked BLM, that loved green issues, unto the point of having an utterly execrable half-hour-long daily climate change show, which, I mean, on a channel that nobody watched. Really, nobody watched that show.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't news. It was agitprop, it was propaganda, it was activism. And that idea of activism supplanting journalism, I mean, we can argue about this, but for me, that was what was going on.
Okay. So then why GB News? Simply because you thought they were the new right-leaning voice?
Yeah, exactly. And I think because you arrive at the truth by being disputational, because, in newspapers, if you come from the left, you buy the Mirror, you buy the Guardian. If you come from the right, you buy the Telegraph, you buy the Sun. No such choice exists in the broadcasting landscape. The indistinguishable, really, the output of BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Sky. And then along came GB News and Talk TV around about the same time.
Yeah.
And for me, that was refreshing because, as I say, you arrive at the truth by being disputational. That's what you do in Parliament. There's a government, there's an opposition. It's what happened in the courts. There's a prosecution with their facts, and then the defence present alternative facts. That's what's happening, and somewhere in the middle is where the truth lies. And I just felt with the arrival of GB News, we were getting this great recalibration of the media landscape. Yes, you had the mainstream media, legacy media outfits like Sky, like Channel 4 News, but then along came the upstarts who were finally giving you a spectrum to choose from.
Mm-hmm. When you were at Sky, were you ever told to not cover a story? Or did you ever go to the bosses and say, hey, there's this church being converted into a mosque, and actually I think we should send a reporter down? And the bosses said, no, Colin, we're not going to do that.
JJ, I think you know the way it works is it tends to be much more subtle than that. There was only one really glaring example I can think of where I had to say, look, we're not doing this. And I was covering for somebody else's shift, and I was driving up to London, and a producer called me, and it was in the midst of COVID lockdown, and he said, it was a Thursday evening, on the stroke of 8 o'clock, we want you to get from behind the desk and walk over to the big screen, and we'll take at that point a live shot of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Leader of the Opposition Keir Starmer. They'll be banging their pots and pans and clapping for the NHS, and we'll have you at the news screen, and you'll be doing the same. And I said, no, I won't be doing the same, because that is not the detachment that people expect. You're attaching yourself to a cause that maybe a few months later you may need to criticise those doctors and nurses. Yeah. Maybe it turns out you're going to slag them off rather than just big them up. And we didn't clap for the last lot of heroes who came back in coffins via RAF Bryce Norton from Afghanistan and Iraq. Yeah. Why are we standing up now? Because the story will shift, and then you'll look silly. Yeah. So that was for me a moment when I thought they've lost it. They've lost the plot. And I think there's a rationale behind it, JJ, which is that what's happened to channels like Sky, but TV news providers generally, is what happened 15 years before to newspapers, maybe 20 years earlier. They suddenly realized that if they were putting yesterday's news out for tomorrow morning's newspaper readers, suddenly people could switch on the TV news and they'd know right then. So newspapers pivoted. They pivoted away from the news and gave people opinion and analysis and personalities and emotion. And emotion's the big new thing on the block for TV, because TV 20 years later realized that smartphones were stealing their lunch. Actually, if you really want to know what's happening right now, you look at Twitter, you look at your phone. You don't look at Sky News, you don't look at the BBC. So they've had to pivot. And the other place they've pivoted, as well as opinion and emotion, is they've pivoted away from the customer, because, as I mentioned, there are so few people watching these news channels. Yeah. But they're really expensive to run. They cost a bomb.
So why are they still doing it?
Well, partly for that regulatory stuff. I think it gives them a certain establishment prestige. I think also they feel they've got a purpose at a time like this amongst the bien-pensant. Look at our awards cabinet. Look how many BAFTAs we've got. We've got this Emmy. We must be doing something right. Bullshit. Yeah. You've created this new metric called awards, given to you by people in your industry who think like you, no cognitive diversity. They think like you. Yeah. And this is the metric that you point to demonstrate the success of your venture. Hang on, what happened to viewers? What happened to listeners? What happened to customers? Remember when it used to be a commercial operation? Yeah. When you had viewers. So I think that's the other thing. They've pivoted towards saying, look, we've got these shiny awards, but don't mention the fact that nobody watches.
Gosh, you're right. It was only last month, I think, Sky were harping on about winning a Royal Television Society award.
And they always have done. And I understand why they do it.
Yeah, but no one's watching. So the people who are deciding who wins are the same people who are making the shows, probably.
But that mindset of not doing it for the customer, doing it for your peers and contemporaries, feeds through into everything. So I remember listening to, I still, for my sins, it helps me wake up, listen to the BBC Today Radio 4 Today programme, and there was an item that they were doing about they had an Israeli foreign ministry spokesman on. And it's a deeply ritualized encounter. I wouldn't call it journalism. It's this sort of, it's a ritual. And the ritual is the guy comes on and you beat the living shit out of him. And it's not a particularly forensic attempt to find out what's going on. It's not an attempt to listen. Whatever your views are on Israel. I'm merely citing the Israeli foreign, as a sort of punchbag panto villain that the BBC would do this too. But as I'm listening to the interview, I'm thinking, this is not for the listeners. This is for the presenters, producers, behind her
Yeah.
in the newsroom. That's who it's for. It's a test of her journalistic virility, and she has to pass it. Otherwise, people are talking by their hand saying, why did she soft soap? Why did she soft soap that Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesperson?
What were the early days like of GB News? Was it full of believers? Everyone in there was like, yeah, come on, UK, UK.
Do you know when you've got those as a toddler? Have you got toddlers? You know,
It's 5 years old
5
now.
years old.
Yeah.
Well, when he was a toddler,
Yeah.
and they would put those maybe a train set that would constantly come off the rails, or a
Yeah.
dumper truck. It was a car crash. It was a total car crash. It was enormous. It was great fun. It was hugely stressful.
Yeah.
I loved it. It was the most vital time of my working career, and
wow.
I cherish it still, which may seem odd to people because it was pretty tough.
Yeah.
Did people believe? Some did, some didn't, and I found that strange. I still find that. I think it's changed now. I think there are more believers. I think there are more ideological travellers involved there. I think that's a good thing. People may say, well, hang on, how can you object to ideology in news? I don't object to ideology in news. I object to the fact that it's one ideology that people can't choose another ideology from. So I think that's changed. I think that GB News has found its feet. I think it's still struggling with advertisers. I think it's getting more advertisers than it did. I had dinner with the chief exec, Angelo Frankopoulos, 3 or 4 weeks ago. He has stuck to his knitting, and I think it's paying off. Will it ever make money? I don't know. Is it moving to the Overton window to the horror of liberals? Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
Is there a degree of loyalty to that news channel, the likes of which you do not find anywhere else? Absolutely. It's done what it set out to do, which is to give a voice to people who were hitherto voiceless. And I know it's had its controversies and it's had its troubles, but it's still standing. Its viewing figures are going up, and I look at people like Michelle Dewberry with that thick Hull accent and her smart as a whip brain.
Yeah.
And I think you wouldn't have found a place in TV news before, and now you've got one, and your viewers love you.
That is true. One of the criticisms I hear about GB News the most is that it's reform TV. It's Nigel Farage's propaganda arm. I think that's fair.
It's not unfair. I mean, Nigel Farage. I don't like the habit of people have of using his first name. It's not a cult of personality. He's a potential future prime minister. We all do it. Right?
Yeah.
We did it with Boris. But Nigel Farage is the most accomplished broadcaster I have ever seen. And it was extraordinary to see him coming into the studio without auto cue. He would do an hour on TV, no auto cue. I've never seen the like.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'd come in having had an agreeable lunch. It made no difference. So is it reform TV? I think they would say with some justification they are letting 1,000 flowers bloom, and there are many, many different voices, and they cleave to no one particular party line. I think that's what they'd say. And I think they can justify saying we represent views other than those of reforms. And let's also bear in mind that right-wing politics are changing all the time. Reform's in danger of being outflanked on the right by people like Restore Britain and Advance UK and all this sort of stuff. So there's this internecine People's Front of Judea stuff going on the right. And, what Nigel says on reform... on GB News now more than ever assumes this sort of centre ground value, I think, which is interesting. Things are happening on the right of British politics.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly, if you're enjoying what you're seeing right now, make sure you sign up to our premium offering. There's a link in the description. You'll get exclusive articles and columns from the Daily Express, and you'll get some stuff from us on the Daily Expresso that other people simply can't see. Now back to you, Colin. You've joined Reform UK. You are a true believer.
Yeah, no, I am actually. I am. And
you do not come across, to be honest, as what I think the mainstream people would think of as a Reform UK supporter.
No, I think I'm not going to call it I'm about to call it a broad church. It's a broad church, and I look, and some people have, it's like anything. When you jump in, you jump. I'm a bit of a sheep. I took my lead from other people. Tim Montgomery, very reasonable man.
He's very reasonable. Tim
James
Montgomery.
Orr, to Danny Kruger. Danny Kruger's decision to join as a Christian for me was a big deal. I do media training with them once a week, and I do about a dozen a day. And these are aspirant councillors. Sometimes there are people who you think, well, you're going to be an MP. if you get the chance. You'll be a great MP.
Yeah.
And what is immensely striking about it, and I don't want to, it's a private thing. It's a confidential thing, so I shan't name any names, obviously. But what strikes me is the caliber of the people and the diversity of the people. And I mean, literally, diversity is in the way that word's come to be known. I mean, I do groups of half a dozen. Some of those groups are, three Anglo-Indians. There was one guy. He was a Can I say this? I think I can say this. He was a lawyer in Moldova. He came to the UK. He was a brickie. He's worked his way up. He's built a business. His monologue about why he loves this country moved me to tears. We were doing, ersatz interviews. We were doing fake interviews, fake TV interviews to get them used to being in a studio. Amazing. That sense of people feeling, relatively new arrivals to the UK, that this country has somehow lost its way. There's a huge amount of positivity in those groups, but there's also one abiding principle, which is that people are really fearful for where the future's going. They think it's pretty existential.
Yeah.
Now you can say, okay, that's middle-aged men and women always thinking the world is going to hell in a handcart, and of course there's some truth in that. But I look to my native Bradford. Bradford, where I was born, don't sound like I was brought up there, but I was. And I now see in Bradford a prototype for other parts of the country. It's not just Bradford. Bradford's not an outlier anymore. It's Bournemouth, it's Bridgend, and so on.
Yeah.
And that's what's changed, and that's what Reform are responding to.
And so you see diversity with Reform in the candidates who you're seeing every day. You're seeing diversity in thought, I presume, also. Do you seriously believe that they can be the next government?
I do. I'm not here as a Reform
I know.
apologist or a Reform spokesman. They've got people employed to do that. I'm just a member like any other. I paid my 25 quid or whatever it is. That's the extent of my affiliation. Yes, I do. And I think there is obviously a problem, which is that the fact there are so many novices, clean skins, people who've not moved from quad to quad to quad, university to law school. They've got people with so much real life experience. That's a huge advantage. But obviously the downside is they don't know where the levers of power necessarily are. Nigel Farage seems to have made a calculation, which is, I do need the Jenricks of this world. I do need the Suella Bradmans of this world, because they've done it. They know how to deal with the civil service. They've worked on delivery through the blob, picking their way through this morass, through this stickly treacle of government oversight. So can they? The question is, can they deliver? I think they can, and I think that by 2029 we'll need something. This country will need radical heart surgery, and they're not going to get it from the Tories. And by the way, I voted for Kemi. I think she's doing brilliantly.
Yeah.
I think there is a small state, low tax hole at the heart of British politics, and maybe she's going to get the Tories to fill it. Maybe they will come back to the fore. I mean, would I like to see ultimately some sort of pact if it's necessary? If it's necessary, sure.
Between the Tories and Reform.
Yeah, and maybe somebody further to the right. I mean, do you want Restore Britain got 7% in the first poll taken of their support?
Yeah,
that could take vital votes in some seats from Reform. I want to see. We're going to see a coalition on the left to stop Reform.
Yeah,
let's make sure there is an equal and opposite coalition on the right to make sure we don't by 2029 get the most hideous kind of coalition involving the Greens, the SNP, and Labour, and maybe a bit of the Lib Dems. Who knows?
Yeah,
it would be a catastrophe.
I totally agree with you. If you had the ear of Starmer for 5 minutes.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. And probably repudiate Blair.
Yeah.
I think a little bit. I think Blair gets away with it. I mean, Blair was, I met him a few times, and he was this magnetic, world-class politician. But my God, he left so many landmines that have taken a while to detonate.
Yeah.
But they've been brilliant at ruining our country, and somehow he's got away with it. So I'd like him to say something about Mandelson, who was such a key part of New Labour. He hasn't, and he won't.
Yeah.
I'd like him to say something about what a catastrophe it was to urge 50% of young Britons to go to university, which have turned out to be ideological factories. Oh, and also brilliant ways of stopping people attaining the milestones that hitherto previous generations took for granted. Buying a home, starting a family.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear him say sorry for the Equality Act and all that bullshit about protected characteristics, post-Macpherson report, which has been so ruinous. Let's treat people by the contents of their character, not by any of their ascribed characteristics. And let's consider that devolution, which was meant to be a brake on breaking up the country, has ended up being an accelerator. Devolution, he thought was a great idea. It's breaking up this magnificent union, the most successful political union in global history. I'd like to see him take some responsibility for all that and maybe say sorry.
So you think Tony Blair's the reason Labour's doing so poorly now, or the country's doing so poorly?
I think the country, yeah. I mean, he did really well. I mean, nobody was more successful. Sorry about that. Nobody was more successful as a Labour Prime Minister than Tony Blair. But I just think that because of the smooth surfaces, we ignored the legacy that he left behind, which is gigantic.
Yeah. Immigration is also a topic that, Blair has been part of the problem of. It's a silly question, really, but do you have like a simple way of fixing immigration in this country? I mean, I suppose the ultimate answer would be stop immigration now. Essentially, that's the quick fix.
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, I would. I think we just need time. This country's got a fabulous record at assimilation. If you look at things like racial intermarriage, amazing, but it takes time. And when I look at a city like Bradford, first generation Pakistanis came to work in the textiles mills. They talk strong Yorkshire accents, maybe play a bit of cricket. They weren't going down to the pub, but they were part of the warp and weft of that culture. Yeah. Third generation, fourth generation, they're more Pakistani. And that's a function of numbers. It's just the arithmetic. It's just if you've got a school where, like the school I went to in Bradford, 50-50, indigenous white, lots of Sikhs, lots of Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, Kashmiri Muslims, you're learning from each other. You go to a 98% Kashmiri heritage school. Who's learning? You can go through, and people like Louise Casey have talked about this, you can go through whole days in Bradford, cities like Bradford, and not really come across anybody who doesn't look like you, think like you, act like you. So we just need a pause. And I'd like to see it more than a pause. I mean, I'd like to see a sort of cessation, because I think that the balance can't get too out of kilter. But there has to be an acceptance that it's an equation. If you stop immigration, who's going to work in the hospitals? Who's going to work in the service stations? I'm not saying, that's the way it's presented. You have to grow your own. I've got 6 kids. I've got 6 children because my late wife was a brilliant mum, and we are Catholic. I loved, I loved having a big family. The state will never pat me on the shoulder and say, Colin, thanks. Thanks for giving us 6 future taxpayers, none of whom will trouble His Majesty's prison service or need Prevent to look them up. I will never be thanked for that, and nor will millions of parents like me. The truth is, with a birth rate at 1.4 and declining fast, with young people actually thinking that the future is so bleak they can't face having children. You need what compared to when the plague was happening? Are things that bleak? I mean, are we that? We've got to address the other side of the equation. If you're going to stop immigration, you've got to grow your own, and you've got to create the conditions where people feel they can bring young people into the world, and who will then be future Britons.
What about Christianity? You're a Catholic.
Yep.
An area like Bradford, I don't know what the demographic is there now, but I would imagine Christianity is probably less than 15-20% of active Christians.
I would thought so. Yeah, if that.
So how important is it that we bring Christianity back as a whole across the country, being taught in schools? And I don't mean we're going to teach about Islam, we're going to teach about Sikhism, teach those things, of course, but every morning it should be, I think, morning prayer. Everyone does morning prayer every morning. Once a month, maybe the kids have been taken to church for a mass, etc., etc. How important is Christianity to the future of Britain?
I think it's vital, because without it, it's not the Britain of millennia. Because I'm a professing Christian, I believe all men are my brothers. I really believe that, and I don't think some people on my side of the aisle always think that, who aren't Christian. But the Christian insight is that all men are my brothers. So that does affect how I deal with Muslims or Hindus or Sikhs. You're my brother. You are my brother. I went to a conference last week on what maybe or may not be a Christian revival. Bible sales are increasing sharply.
Yep.
Anecdotally, people are going to church more. I go to a gym. I know you can tell I go to a gym.
You're in good shape. Yeah. You are in good shape, mate.
Stop it. There's a 30-year-old guy who helps me, helps lift weights with me, who talks about men like him left school at 16 who are finding their Christian faith, their feet in Christianity. Something's happening. At the Christian Revival Conference I went to, there was a guy called John O'Sullivan, who was Margaret Thatcher's speechwriter, and he talked about the necessity of being unafraid to convert Muslims to Christianity. And I've met over the years a guy called Michael Nazir Ali, who, were it not for Blair, probably would have been the Archbishop of Canterbury in the early 2000s. He became the Bishop of Rochester, Church of England. His father was a Shia Pakistani, converted to Christianity. And Michael, who's now actually a Catholic, used to work and was involved in a charity who would protect British Muslims who were living in fear of their lives because of apostasy. What was deemed to be apostasy, them renouncing their Muslim faith.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, when the Church of England hosts, has the call to prayer in its cathedrals, I can see why they want to open their hearts and do that, but I think it's a mistake because I think it's relativizing. The brutal truth is, as a Christian, I don't believe all. I reverence my faith. I respect other faiths, but I reverence only one. That's my own.
Yeah.
And I really think there is only one path to salvation. If I didn't, why am I bothering?
Yeah.
And it's not to disdain or demean other faiths. I'm just saying that's my tradition. And I think people have to have confidence in that. Not arrogance, but they've got to have confidence in that. And I worry that we've got legislation coming down the track which will, under the guise of Islamophobia, which will one day make it quite difficult for me to say things which seem really obvious to me, which is that, for instance, one of the great historical virtues of Christianity over the centuries has been that gospel injunction to render unto God what is due to God and render unto Caesar what is due to Caesar. A basic division of church and state. There is no such division between mosque and state. Because Islam prescribes a way of running your life in all areas of life.
Yeah.
Now, many Muslims will say that's brilliant. That speaks to my life, and that's for them to decide. But Christianity, I think, is a better way of arranging human affairs. I worry that Islamophobia definitions will stop me saying something as blunt as that in the future.
Well, Zach Polanski has just said, I think yesterday, that if they get into power, the Greens, they're going to remove Christianity as the faith of this country.
No, he didn't. He said he was talking about disestablishing the Church of England, and as a Catholic, that who saw, well, didn't see, but the Catholic Church was the dissolution of the monasteries, 450 whatever it is under Henry VIII. The establishment of the Church of England as a Catholic is a problematic thing anyway. I would have no problem with the Church of England being disestablished, which I think is as my understanding is what Zach Polanski was saying. I've got no problem with it.
Why?
Because I think it might help the Church of England find its feet, which it's lost.
But then how would we make the country... We are a Christian nation. I'm a Catholic, the same as you, but then...
But JJ, that's where the growth is, right? The growth is not coming from the Anglican Church, is it?
No, it's not coming from the Anglican Church. But even as a Catholic, I still want to see all Christians prosper. Yeah. And I think if we take away the Church of England, and again, like you, I disagree with the fact that essentially it was created so Henry VIII could just get his leg over with another wife. Many
you show
times
great
over.
Ecclesiastical knowledge in that.
But I think removing that then weakens Christianity as a whole in this country.
Interesting. I don't share your view. I know what you're getting at, but I don't share those misgivings because I think it's such a busted flush anyway. I mean, what would you lose by disestablishment? You'd lose a few bishops in the House of Lords. Tell me, what would we lose?
It's a slippery slope. We've already got churches being turned into flats and being turned in mosques.
Zia Yusuf of Reform says he would make it illegal for derelict churches to be turned into mosques. So in that regard, Reform is explicitly saying we will protect Christianity in this country.
Yeah.
I think that's a better way of doing it than saying let's stop the Church of England being disestablished. I just think the Church of England is so broken. the growth is elsewhere.
Yeah.
The torch of Christianity is in other hands, not the Archbishop of Canterbury's.
Okay. Immigration. You have been on the front lines of the migrant crisis throughout your career. What's some of the most shocking things you've seen?
The 2015 migrant crisis in countries like Croatia, Hungary, Serbia, Greece, and in particular one scene, it's just a little vignette really, on the Serbian border, the Hungarian border with Serbia, and there were hundreds of young men. The media was saying they were Syrian, but they were from all over the world. Some of them wearing sort of jihadist-style bandanas.
Wow.
In a standoff with the Hungarian riot police. Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, had said, "Thou shalt not pass, you're not coming in." They wanted to go through Hungary to get to Germany. Angela Merkel, the then German Chancellor, had said, "We are welcoming, let's have 1 million Syrians," neglecting the fact that actually only a minority were Syrians, a large minority, but actually a minority. And the guys with the bandanas were so pissed off they started bricking the riot police, and it was a full-scale riot, and ducking, and it made for great TV. But I remember thinking, this is nuts. These are people trying to break into a sovereign country, and the tenor of the way that was reported back home by Sky and others, which was explicitly, in my opinion, to side with the migrants who were trying to break into somebody's country as victims. So because there was tear gas, there were people choking. It's better than a bullet through the eyes, which is what they do in Iran. And people, my colleagues from the media were focusing on, this woman, coughing up because she's had all the tear gas, as if that were the story. And again, to the original point, JJ, there wasn't a diktat, there wasn't a fiat from the newsroom or the editor saying, "Go easy on the migrants, guys." There was just this sort of collective want of scepticism. And I don't know where that went. I mean, that idea that journalists were sort of caustic and acerbic and cynical and always doubted motive, that's gone. And in 2015, there was a studied determination always to go for the English speaker, the woman with the head uncovered, the woman.
Yeah.
95% of the guys, here's another woman. And it was just skewing the picture so much. So for me, that was telling. But over the piece, grooming is a better example. The way that story wasn't told and the way it was only individuals who got it through. Sometimes individuals can really move history.
Yeah.
Whether it's Elon Musk right down to Andrew Norfolk of The Times, who just kept on writing stories about the grooming gangs, or Anne Cryer, the Labour MP for Keighley, who I interviewed a couple of times, and who was denounced by her Labour colleagues on the backbenches, including Diane Abbott, as a racist. So, and that shapes the way the media handle those stories, or more importantly, never handle those stories, because, I remember going back with the Sky camera crew to the church I was baptised in Bradford in 2006. There was still an acrid smell in the air. Father, why? There were some hotheads who tried to set fire to the church about a few years ago. When, Father? Well, it was in 2000. When, Father? It was on the night that the Americans started bombing the Taliban in Afghanistan. Father, you don't think maybe that's a weird coincidence? And by the way, was it reported? Well, no, we didn't, So that sort of lack of curiosity.
Yeah.
And I observed this as I was driving in, JJ. There was the UK Press Gazette, the sort of in-house trade journal of British journalism, were just reporting that the government is about to spend £12 million of our money, taxpayers' money, supporting local media. And I started in local newspapers. I think they're great. They were great. Do you think really that taxpayers' money, the government's going to give money to entities who will then do big expose of grooming gangs or the troubles of Bradford? No. I don't think so. No. It's going to be, don't look back in anger, come bayar, everything's okay.
Yeah. Well, is there a story that you wish personally that you would cover differently from your past?
Well, actually, I suppose that story in 2006, I wish I'd had the balls to do it. I wish I'd called out some of the stuff I could see around Brexit as well, because it felt to me like the people I was working with were just so invested, and that was such an important punctuation mark in our recent island story.
Yeah.
You know, that idea that people would genuinely energise and engage my politics again, and a lot of the people I worked with was actually quite appalled by that. You know.
Okay. Tell me about your farming. You're a proper farmer. I know you're going to say it's only a small thing, but I mean, most people I know don't have pigs and chickens, and they're not making sausages themselves at home.
Yeah, no, I why did I do it? Because not because of Clarkson, though he's brilliant. He is brilliant, and he's done amazing things for British farming. I had a friend, still got a dear friend, Nick, who's an agronomist. Agronomist, the people who work out how you can make your crops grow well and how you kill the bugs and the pesticides you use, etc., etc. And we used to go running in Wiltshire where we live, and Nick, what's in the side of that hedge? Why is nothing growing in that field? And this became an interest, and I would go along to lectures, and he would take me along to lectures, and I started subscribing to Farmers Weekly and all this sort of thing. And then the seed planted that maybe one day, when I take the journalistic yoke from my shoulders, I can go and learn about farming. And I'd finished at GB News, or rather they'd finished with me, and then I had a few months at LBC, which was my swan song, which I really enjoyed actually. It was a phone-in show. People would ring in. Some of them were sane, some of them were sober. Quite a lot of them were neither. But it was the kids ridiculed me. It was a graveyard slot. It was 10 p.m. till 1 a.m. I was coming home to my now wife. She was widowed about the same time I was widowed. We got married in 24, and it was like she was widowed again, because I was lying in until whatever. We weren't seeing each other in the evenings. I thought that's not working. And she said, "Why don't you do it? Why don't you go to Cirencester, which is the Royal Agricultural University in the Cotswolds?" And the best part of it was that you would go and visit an actual farm every week. And farming is, like anything, quite blown by the vicissitudes of fashion. So there are fashionable things in farming. Regenerative farming is really fashionable, and the farmers sometimes would say, "Yeah, it sort of works a bit." They weren't dogmatic, but actually sometimes you've got to plough a field, you've got to turn the soil over. So it was just this exposure to people who weren't just talking about it; they're actually doing it, and that was fascinating. They also had fantastic tractors. They tended to have really big tractors, which I love.
Well, just going back to that GB News comment. So you were fired? You didn't quit GB News?
I'm not going to tell you. I realise I've probably told you already. There was a parting of the ways, JJ. There was a parting of the ways. You ruthless dog, you. There was a parting of the ways. There was an amicable part. But look, I give enormous thanks to GB News because the farming happened. We had pigs, sheep, and they called up a year and something ago and said, "Do us a weekly column for our website." And I think I'll file, whatever I file this week will be column number 73, consecutive columns. And you know what it's like? Once you start doing a weekly column, you have to think about what's in the news, you think about what's in the news, and you think about, suddenly you start thinking about it all again. And the other thing that happened was that I went for lunch with a dear friend of mine called Jake Wallace-Simons, who was the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, prolific writer. I proofread his last book, Never Again. And it's called, no, the book's called Never Again. I'll do it again, Jake. I'll do it again. Just the book's called Never Again. And we should think about working together more.
We should.
But he was just saying, look, this was just not long after the events of October the 7th, 23, in Israel. And he was getting death threats, and I thought, geez, And I'd worked in Jerusalem over the years quite a bit, and I always felt the Israelis got a really shit end of the deal because there was this because the way the media work matters, right? So in Jerusalem, over decades, it became a really nice place to work. I know this. I don't want that to sound facetious, but it's true.
Yeah.
You'd stay in a nice 5-star hotel. You'd drive down to Hebron. You'd put the flak vest on. You'd look really tough.
Yeah.
You know, look how brave I am. And then you'd drive back to your 5-star hotel, and you'd have your gin and tonic, and that's great. And there's no secret police knocking on the door at 3 a.m, beating the living shit out of you, stealing your tapes, roughing you up, making life difficult. It's easy. It's safe. It's legal. It's a place of good governance and rule of law. And again, that for Israel's critics, that may sound shocking. Try and do that report in Jordan, in Egypt, in Lebanon. Forget it.
Yeah.
Right. So over decades, that meant you got this huge critical mass building in Jerusalem, and it became self-perpetuating. And the whole story became more important than it really is. You know, to the exclusion of all else. You're not hearing about what's happening in Nigeria because we're going to hear about what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza again. So it's rendered as really parochial, you know, our obsession with that story. I mean, I'm not saying it's a story that shouldn't be told. I'm just saying we obsess about it to a crazy degree.
Yeah, absolutely. You are the most or the least Bradford-sounding son of Bradford.
Yeah. It's a really look. I'm not sensitive about this, but I struggle to justify it. So I've still got family who do not sound like me.
How do they sound?
Like that. To which I would say Ian McKellen, Gandalf, doesn't sound like he came from Wigan. Ken Clarke, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, doesn't sound like he grew up in a 2-up, 2-down in rural Nottinghamshire. Joan Bakewell doesn't sound like she grew up in Liverpool, and so on and so forth. Did I ever actively sort of take elocution lessons or seek to be posher, upgrade? No, I didn't. I really didn't. Did I work for the BBC for a bit? Yes, I did, and I was a broadcaster. I actually believe, and this may sound like a fairly lame justification, but I happen to believe it to be true, that it's an aesthetic thing a little bit as well. I don't like history English, and I hate it when people don't enunciate properly, and it's not very inclusive. So, going back to where we started, JJ, nobody recognises me apart from cloakroom attendants in clubs and restaurants in London who grew up in Africa, and I'm serious. And they say, "It's you, isn't it?" And I always want to say, "That's right, it's Dermot Murnaghan." But the point is, they've learned that they watch Sky News in Namibia, Tanzania, to learn English. And what they don't want when they then move to the UK, having spent years learning English from textbooks, is for the gap between written and spoken English to be as profound and yawning as it is. And it's massive. So for me, this isn't posh. It's inclusive. You know, it's clear speech. It's enunciated speech.
Yeah.
I still say last and past and fast. You know, and that's not deliberate. It's just a thing. You'll hear people who've got broadly neutral accents who still do the flat vowels. They can't. That's the last. And I'd be more if we're trying to do a fake test here.
Yeah.
I'm always interested in the people who have ironed those out, because that's deliberate.
Okay.
It seems to me. I
Yeah.
could talk about this for hours. It's really dull.
No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But Bradford, that's where you're born and bred.
Yeah.
A lot of things happened to you in Bradford over the years. Would you write a book about it? So I'm going to keep on doing interviews like this with people.
No, I am because I'm not going to. Yeah, there's Liam Halligan, a dear friend who I worked with at GB News, economist, says write a book about Bradford, and I've taken him at his word. And Bradford's a really important city, JJ. It's got the youngest population in Europe. It's got the biggest mosque in Britain. It's home to a huge, not just Muslim population, specifically Kashmiri population, and specifically from Mirpur, which is a small part of Kashmir. I've worked a bit. I've travelled as a backpacker, and I've also worked as a journalist in Pakistan over the years. And I remember being at a drinks party in Lahore and meeting a Pakistani there who said, "You can't believe." When I heard I was from Bradford, he said, "I can't believe you took all our Mirpuris, you silly fuckers." You know, they are. You've taken our least productive, least educated people, and now they're your problem. I mean, in a sense, it was a problem that was created by others. There was a dam in Kashmir the valley was flooded, 100,000 people displaced. Where they're going to go? We had pretty unscrupulous mill owners, I think, who wanted cheap labour, didn't much care what the social consequences of that might be.
Yeah.
male textile workers flooded into the mills, just as the work was flooding out of the mills. And then a city like Bradford, you had, I think, a fairly sort of, at times quite stoical, you could maybe, if you were being less complimentary, say dour indigenous people. Mm-hmm. Then you had a Puri caste who are very clan-based. And some of the practices you see in Bradford's got the highest rate of of cousin marriage in the country, with all the congenital problems that flow from that.
Yeah. Arranged
marriages, all kinds of stuff that really ought never to have been allowed. And a place in the origin story of British political Islam like no other, the 1989 burning of the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie outside the town hall in Bradford. Nobody was prosecuted, JJ. There were people saying, death to this author, he must be killed. Dozens of people ought to have been thrown in the slammer. And it ought to have been an exemplary, a case of exemplary sentencing. We are not going to put up with this shit. It's not okay in this country, to demand the head of somebody who's written a book. It's not okay. It's not okay.
Yeah.
And if we'd maybe drawn a line then, we might not have had some of the problems we have now. And that all started in Bradford.
So what we see in Bradford, as you say, with the first cousin marriage, with some Pakistani castes saying, you've imported the worst, laziest Pakistani castes in that country.
Not my words. I'm not calling them lazy.
The words of a native to that country. Do you see that reflecting and repeating in other parts of the UK?
Not to the same extent that it's true in Bradford. I mean, the Kashmiri population is big in London, Manchester, parts of Birmingham, and obviously that sort of M62 corridor.
Yeah.
But Bradford's special because it's so big. It's always been in the shadow of Leeds, but by population, it's going to outgrow Leeds at some point. It's a big, big city. And, it had this amazing, rich history. I was looking at some footage a week ago. 1942, Winston Churchill addressing a crowd of thousands as part of the geeing up the country in the some of the darkest days of World War II. Mono-ethnic, obviously, but brilliantly dressed police officers everywhere, Bobby's helmets, all the rest of it. And then realising I'd also and the reason I'd looked for this footage was that there'd been a protest of Ayatollah Khomeini supporters on the same steps of Bradford City Hall, lamenting the death of a man who wished nothing but ill on little Satan, this country, and thinking how quickly history can turn so profoundly. And this comes back to where we started a little bit, JJ. That you say about what would you do about immigration. I just say the shock of what we're seeing, the speed of what we're seeing, the speed of change is so utterly stunning that in 60 years, my mum from Bradford says she still remembers, this is Bradford, seeing her first non-white face in the 1960s on a bus. Now, people can scoff at that and say that's bullshit. It's true. She worked in the mill, same mill that two of her sisters and her mother worked in. These are the communities we're talking about here.
Yeah.
That city matters.
Final question, Colin. Are you optimistic about Britain's future or pessimistic?
I'm incredibly pessimistic. Partly being a Yorkshireman. And I want to, as a Christian, I have hope. I really have hope that all will be well. And that's my hope. My expectation is less hopeful, to the point where actually my wife and I were in America a few months ago. I remember sitting on the plane on the way back thinking, does there come a point when you have a conversation with your own children about where you honestly think their future lies? Because I think a lot of the lights on the big, a lot of the warning lights are going off.
Yeah.
I think the direction of travel is for the next 3 years in particular, because you've got some really shit Labour MPs who never expected to be in. They know they'll be out by 29.
Yeah.
And I just think you're looking at a scorched earth policy for the next 3 years. I've no idea. I think they're shifting to the left. I think they're rattled by Gorton and Denton, where the Greens did so well. I think there'll be lots of, feeding the crocodile, as Churchill said, style appeasement of the Islamo-Greens, and I think that's potentially ruinous. So, I want to be optimistic.
Yeah.
And it's not without hope. And the 2029, I'm hearing more and more people, as you probably are, JJ, who say that general election in 29, the next one, is pretty key.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to be so gloomy.
Not at all. Colin Brazier, absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Pleasure's all mine.
Thank
JJ,
you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that special edition of the Daily Expresso. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the hype button. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.